Every story has a breaking point. Every person has a moment when pain eclipses reason. In Germany in 1981, Marianne Bachmeier sat quietly inside a courtroom. In her handbag, a pistol. On her mind, a single thought. The man who had taken her daughter could not be allowed to walk free. What she did next would shock an entire nation and ignite a debate that still burns today. This is the story of pain, justice, and the devastating price of vengeance. Before tragedy etched her name into history, Anna Bachmeier lived a childhood painted with wonder. Born on May 14, 1972, in the quiet city of Lübeck, Germany, Anna grew up during a time when life seemed slower, gentler, when children still played barefoot on warm cobblestones, chasing kites across endless blue skies. She was a burst of energy in a small frame, a whirlwind of laughter, wide eyes, and endless curiosity. Anna loved animals with a devotion that was pure and fierce. At home, she cared tenderly for her kitten, Felix, cradling him like a fragile treasure, whispering secrets into his soft gray fur. Neighbors often spotted her rescuing injured birds, building tiny shelters out of shoeboxes and scraps. In every living thing, Anna saw a friend waiting to be made. School was an adventure for Anna, not a chore. She adored art class, where her small hands could bring wild colors to life on paper. Teachers described her as imaginative, a daydreamer who often stared out the windows, spinning stories about faraway castles, magical creatures, and daring quests. At home, Marianne was both mother and father, protector and teacher. Raising Anna alone after a turbulent marriage, she worked long hours, but always made time to share bedtime stories and teach Anna the constellations at night. On clear evenings, they would sit bundled together on their small balcony, tracing the stars with outstretched fingers, making wishes on falling lights. Their home was modest but filled with laughter. Scuffed floors from Anna's running feet, walls taped with her handmade drawings, the refrigerator cluttered with magnets holding proud school awards. In the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread and hearty soups wrapped around them like a second home. Sundays were their sacred days. Marianne and Anna would ride bikes through the green parks, picnic under ancient oak trees, and visit the bustling Lübeck markets, where Anna's favorite treat was a warm pretzel nearly as big as her face. Life wasn't without struggles. The money was often tight and loneliness sometimes crept in. But the love they shared stitched over every gap. In Anna's world, her mother was her hero, and for Marianne, Anna was her reason to wake up every day, to hope, to dream. Looking back, it's clear that Anna Bachmeier lived more life in her short years than many do in a lifetime. She loved without hesitation. She explored without fear. She trusted the world completely, a world that would soon betray her innocence in the cruelest way imaginable. It was an ordinary morning, the kind that passes by without notice, until you look back and realize it was the moment everything changed. Tuesday, May 5th, 1980. Spring had blossomed in Lübeck, Germany. The air was thick with the scent of lilacs, and the sidewalks were dotted with children making their way to school. Inside their small apartment, Anna was a whirlwind of excitement. She had a minor argument with her mother that morning, something about a permission slip for a school trip she wanted to go on. Like all children, Anna believed there would always be time to make up, always more mornings. She slammed the door with just a little too much force, a playful pout still lingering on her face. Marianne watched her go, leaning in the doorway, sipping her coffee. She didn't know it was the last time she would see her daughter alive. That tiny argument, so meaningless, would come to haunt her, an echo that never faded. Anna never made it to school that day. Somewhere between her front door and the safe brick walls of her classroom, she crossed paths with someone she could never have prepared for. The hours ticked by. At first, Marianne thought perhaps Anna had gone to a friend's house after school. Maybe she had lost track of time. But as the afternoon faded into evening, and the familiar rattle of Anna's bicycle was absent from the driveway, a seed of dread began to grow in Marianne's chest. By nightfall, Marianne's fear had bloomed into panic. She called neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen her little girl. No one had. Finally, she called the police. Officers arrived, polite but cautious. At first, they suggested Anna had probably just run away, perhaps after their morning argument. It was a theory that stabbed at Marianne's heart, the idea that her daughter might have been angry enough to leave. But deep down, she knew Anna wasn't the kind of child to simply vanish. The arrest came quickly, but no speed could erase the horror of what had happened. Klaus Grabowski, a 35-year-old man already known to the police for prior crimes against children, was charged with Anna's murder. For Marianne, the news was both a confirmation of her worst fears and the beginning of a fresh nightmare. Grabowski was no stranger to the criminal justice system. Years earlier, he had been convicted of sexual offenses against 2 other young girls. He had even undergone chemical castration, but later, through hormonal treatment, he reversed its effects. Despite these red flags, he lived freely, among families, among children. When Anna crossed his path that May morning, Grabowski was once again free to act, with devastating consequences. It was revealed that he had kept Anna captive for hours inside his home before finally ending her life. Details too gruesome to bear trickled into the public through court records, newspaper headlines, and whispered horror. The trial of Klaus Grabowski began in early 1981, inside the Regional Court of Lübeck. It was supposed to be a simple matter, a trial by law, a verdict by jury, but nothing about it felt simple to Marianne. She sat in the gallery day after day, a shell of the vibrant woman she once was. Her body remained, but her spirit seemed adrift, held together by pure willpower and an aching need for justice for her daughter. Each day, she listened as defense attorneys painted Grabowski as a disturbed man, deserving of compassion, rehabilitation, pity. They spoke clinically about Anna, reducing her to a victim, a statistic, a line item in a file. But to Marianne, Anna was not a name on paper. She was the little girl with sparkling eyes and endless dreams, and no one in that courtroom seemed to remember her. There were moments during the trial when Marianne felt she could barely breathe, when photos of Anna's small belongings, a shoe, a school bag, were brought into evidence. Marianne clutched the edge of the bench so tightly that her knuckles turned white. But worst of all were the details of how the justice system had failed. Why had a convicted pedophile been allowed to roam free? Why had no one been watching him? These questions burned in Marianne's mind like wildfire. As the trial dragged on, the public grew restless. Outrage simmered in Lübeck and across Germany. Newspapers printed editorials raging at the system. Citizens wrote letters of support to Marianne. Strangers offering comfort, fury, solidarity. Inside the courtroom, however, the slow, deliberate machinery of justice continued. Blind to emotion, immune to grief. Marianne sat quietly, her face a frozen mask, feeling as though the world had gone mad around her. It was during a break in the trial, a simple, almost forgotten moment, that something inside Marianne broke. Standing alone in the courthouse, looking through a window smeared by rain, she realized something terrible. The court could convict Klaus Grabowski, but nothing they did would bring Anna back. Nothing they did could heal the gaping hole inside her. A mother's pain is a force beyond law, beyond reason. And for Marianne Bachmeier, that pain was about to erupt in a moment that would shock the world. To the outside world, the wheels of justice were turning. Inside the courtroom, testimony was heard, exhibits were entered, witnesses sworn in. The trial appeared orderly, structured, the way justice was supposed to look. But for Marianne Bachmeier, and for millions watching from afar, the truth was painfully clear. The system had already failed. It had failed Anna long before her life was taken, and now it was failing her again. Marianne learned to her horror that Klaus Grabowski's history was not some hidden secret. Authorities knew his record. More devastating still, it emerged that Grabowski's girlfriend, a woman he lived with, had helped manipulate Anna into entering their home. It was a betrayal beyond words. Another adult, someone who should have protected a child, instead assisting in her doom. The layers of failure were suffocating. The courts, the psychiatric institutions that released Grabowski without adequate safeguards, the society that forgot or chose not to see the dangers in its midst. And yet even now, and with the world watching, the system seemed more interested in preserving itself than in admitting its mistakes. The trial moved slowly, bogged down in technicalities. Defense attorneys framed Grabowski not as a predator, but as a victim of his own broken mind. The prosecution struggled to push back. For Maryanne, every day in court felt like a wound reopened. She saw her daughter's memory treated like a chess piece, a tool used to argue legal abstractions. She watched her pain weighed and measured by people who would return to their normal lives when the trial ended, while her own world remained shattered. Outside the courthouse, anger was boiling. Newspapers demanded accountability. Parents organized marches. Letters poured into the court, expressing outrage that such a thing could have been allowed to happen. They demanded harsher penalties for child predators. They demanded reforms to a system that had lost sight of the people it was meant to protect. But inside those cold courtrooms, Maryanne felt something deeper than rage. She felt the crushing, unbearable weight of betrayal. The betrayal of a mother who trusted her society to protect the innocent, and who had been repaid with silence, incompetence, and death. It was not just Klaus Grabowski on trial, it was the entire system. And by now, Maryanne knew it. But justice, true justice, seemed further away than ever. And in that growing darkness, a decision began to take shape inside Marianne Bachmeier. If the system could not deliver justice for Anna, then perhaps she would have to deliver it herself. The system had failed, but Maryanne would not. Perhaps Maryanne hadn't made a conscious decision that morning. Perhaps it was less a plan and more an inevitability. A silent scream turned physical. As Grabowski sat awaiting the next phase of questioning, Maryanne quietly rose from her seat. The courtroom buzzed in a low hum of casual conversations, unaware of the storm about to break. She reached into her bag. Then, in a single moment that would echo through history, Marianne Bachmeier drew her gun and fired. 7 shots, 7 explosions of pain, fury, and unimaginable grief. Klaus Grabowski slumped to the floor, lifeless before he could even cry out. The court erupted. Gasps, screams, shouts. But Maryanne stood frozen, her fury spent, her breathing ragged. In that instant, Marianne Bachmeier was no longer simply Anna's mother. She was something larger. To some, she was a criminal. To others, a symbol of justice in a world that had forgotten mercy. But to Maryanne herself, she was simply a mother who could bear no more. News of the shooting spread like wildfire across Germany and the world. Shock turned to debate. Debate turned to outrage. Had Maryanne done what any mother might do? Or had she placed herself above the law she had once trusted? In a world where justice had been cold, slow, and blind, Maryanne's fury spoke a language everyone could understand. Grief, loss, the unbearable cost of failure. The trial had begun as the trial of Klaus Grabowski. Now it would become the trial of Marianne Bachmeier, a mother who, in one explosive moment, forced a nation to confront its own failures. March 6, 1981, began like any other day of the trial, tense, solemn but structured. By afternoon, it had turned into something else entirely, a day that would rip through Germany's conscience like a thunderclap. After the shots rang out, time seemed to shatter. For seconds, the courtroom was frozen, faces wide-eyed, breathless, suspended between shock and horror. Then, an explosion of noise. Shouts, gasps, people diving for cover. The smell of gunpowder lingered sharp and acrid in the air. At the center of the chaos, Marianne Bachmeier stood motionless. Her hands still trembled slightly. The pistol slipped from her grasp and clattered to the polished floor. In her eyes, not rage, not triumph, only a terrible, hollow sorrow. Security officers moved toward her, slow at first, then faster, cuffing her hands with clinical efficiency. But she did not resist. In that moment, Maryanne was beyond resistance, beyond fear, beyond hope. News traveled fast, faster than even the authorities could react. Within hours, newspapers had printed the headline, "Mother kills daughter's murderer in courtroom shooting." By nightfall, Germany was ablaze with shock, anger, sympathy, and debate. Some wept openly in the streets. Some cursed the system that had driven a mother to take such action. Some more quietly asked dark questions. Had Maryanne committed murder? Or had she committed the only real act of justice this case would ever see? Radio stations lit up with calls. Barbershops, bakeries, classrooms, all buzzed with fierce arguments. Was she a criminal or a mother pushed past human limits? Politicians stumbled over their words. Prosecutors faced a nightmare they had never imagined. The trial, the justice system, the very definition of morality itself, all were now on trial. As the outside world raged and roared, Maryanne sat alone in a holding cell. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Her hands, still stained by cordite, rested limply in her lap. In her mind, images of Anna swirled and faded like smoke. She did not weep. She did not speak. In the silence, she heard the echoes of every moment the system had failed her daughter, and of the single moment she chose to act where others had stood by. As the hours turned to days, public opinion split sharply. Some hailed Maryanne as a mother hero, someone who had given voice to thousands of families who lived in fear of the predators hiding among them. Others warned that if individuals could carry out their own justice, society itself would unravel. Newspapers ran dueling editorials. Maryanne, the Avenger. Maryanne, the Vigilante. In coffee shops and government halls alike, people asked themselves, where did grief end and vengeance begin? The tragedy of Anna Bachmeier was no longer a private sorrow. It had become a public reckoning, a painful mirror showing Germany what it was willing to accept and what it could no longer ignore. On March 2nd, 1983, nearly 2 years after the shooting, Marianne Bachmeier walked into the courtroom again. But this time, she was not just Anna's mother, she was now the accused. The trial was a media sensation. Television trucks lined the courthouse steps. Newspapers sent their best journalists. Around kitchen tables and over radio broadcasts, Germany listened, watched, and waited. Would the court see her as a grieving mother, or a vigilante who had placed herself above the law? Inside, the atmosphere was electric and heavy. At the defense table, Maryanne sat stiff and quiet, dressed plainly, her face marked by exhaustion more than defiance. Her defense attorneys faced an enormous task: to argue not for her innocence, for she had killed in front of dozens of witnesses, but to argue for her humanity. The prosecution painted a different picture: a woman who had smuggled a small pistol into a secure courtroom, a woman who had waited, coldly, deliberately, for the right moment to strike. Maryanne's lawyers did not deny what had happened. They pleaded for understanding, describing a mother broken beyond repair, trapped in a system that had failed her child at every turn. Psychiatrists testified that Maryanne was under an extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the shooting. They argued she was not cold and calculating, but devastated and desperate. The prosecution countered sharply. If Germany allowed emotion to dictate justice, then the law itself would collapse. They warned the court. Maryanne's grief, while unimaginable, could not excuse murder. Justice must be blind, they argued. It must be consistent, even when it hurts. Witnesses for both sides told their truths. Friends of Maryanne spoke about her tender devotion to Anna. Court officials described the chaos of the shooting. Psychologists painted Maryanne as both fragile and fiercely determined. The trial wasn't just about legality anymore. It was about the limits of human suffering. After weeks of gut-wrenching testimony, after hours of legal debate, the trial came to an end. 12 jurors now carried the weight of an entire nation on their shoulders. The question they faced was not simple. Was Maryanne guilty of murder, or had she committed an act of human desperation? Tragic but understandable? The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. Marianne Bachmeier was found guilty of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but would serve only 3. In the end, the court could not wholly condemn her, nor could it fully absolve her. Germany itself, still divided, still aching, had spoken. Marianne Bachmeier's trial did not heal Germany's wounds. It only laid them bare for all to see. But for Maryanne herself, the real sentence was not prison. It was living with the echoes of her daughter's laughter, now forever out of reach. After prison, Maryanne sought to rebuild a life shattered beyond repair. She moved far from Lubeck, eventually settling in Nigeria, then later in Sicily. She tried to find peace, but peace was elusive. In rare interviews, she admitted she was haunted by her choices. The gunshots echoed through her life long after they fell silent in that courtroom. In 1996, Marianne Bachmeier was diagnosed with cancer. She returned to Germany and lived her final days in Lübeck, the city that had been the site of her greatest joy and her deepest sorrow. She died in 1996, aged just 46, and was buried beside her beloved Anna. Marianne's story forces us to ask painful questions. How far would we go for those we love? And when justice fails, who among us could truly say we would do differently?